The morning sun cast long shadows across the fertile plains of southern Burkina Faso, painting the red earth in shades of amber and gold. This was not merely soil beneath the feet of those who walked it. This was sacred ground, watered by generations of sweat, tears, and dreams. Every grain of dust held a story, every rock a memory of hands that had worked this land since time beyond counting. 70-year-old Moussa stood at the edge of his 10-acre farm, his weathered hands resting on a wooden fence post his own father had carved 40 years before. The grooves in the wood matched the lines in his palms, both marked by decades of honest labor. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the smell of damp earth and growing maize. This was the scent of life itself. His farm stretched before him like a patchwork quilt of green and gold. Here, neat rows of maize stood tall, their leaves rustling secrets to the wind. There, groundnut plants spread their roots deep into the generous soil. Beyond them, sorghum swayed in gentle waves, ready for harvest. And cutting through it all, like a silver ribbon of hope, ran the river that never failed, even when the brutal sun cracked the earth of neighboring lands. Moussa's hands were a testament to his life's work. Rough as tree bark, stained permanently with the red clay of Burkina Faso, calloused in places where the hoe handle pressed during planting season. These were not the soft hands of a man who had lived an easy life. These were the hands of a builder, a provider, a guardian of tradition. Each scar told a story. The thick one across his right palm came from clearing thorns 30 years ago. The missing tip of his left index finger was a reminder of the time he had worked too long into the night, too tired to be careful. For 50 years, Moussa had risen before the sun touched the horizon. While the world still slept in darkness, he would already be walking his fields, checking the soil moisture with his bare feet, listening to the whispers of the crops. He knew this land with an intimacy that went beyond mere ownership. He knew which corner would flood first when the rains came heavy. He knew exactly where to plant the beans so they would catch the morning sun but be shaded by afternoon. He could predict the harvest yield by the smell of the air in September. This knowledge had not come from books or schools. It had been passed down through blood and bone, from his grandfather to his father, from his father to him. And he had planned to pass it on to his grandchildren, to continue the unbroken chain that stretched back into the mists of history. The farm was more than Moussa's livelihood. It was the only thing keeping his extended family alive. His 4 sons worked the fields alongside him, their wives preparing meals with the harvest, their children running between the rows playing games as old as the land itself. But the bounty did not stop at his family's table. Half the village depended on Moussa's farm. When drought struck other regions, Moussa's riverside land still produced. When inflation made food unaffordable in the markets, Moussa shared what he grew. He never asked for payment from those who truly could not afford it. His reward was seeing the children in the village grow strong and healthy. Under the massive baobab tree in the center of his compound, 3 generations of his family rested in eternal sleep. His grandfather, who had first cleared this land with nothing but an axe and determination. His grandmother, who had survived the famines of the old days by eating tree bark. His parents, who had raised him to understand that land was not something you owned, but something you belonged to. Their spirits watched over this place, and Moussa felt their presence every single day. He would often sit beneath that ancient tree, its trunk so thick that 5 men holding hands could not encircle it, and speak to his ancestors. He told them about the rains, about the harvests, about their great-great-grandchildren who were learning to read and write in the village school. He made them promises that this land would never be sold, never abandoned, never forgotten. "Money runs out," he would say, repeating the wisdom his father had taught him, "but land lasts forever." It was a simple philosophy born from centuries of experience. Moussa had seen people win fortunes and lose them just as quickly. He had watched neighbors sell their land for what seemed like riches, only to spend it all within years and end up with nothing. But land remained, land provided, land endured. The river that bordered his property was perhaps the greatest blessing of all. Even in the harshest summers, when the earth cracked open like wounds and other streams became nothing but dry beds of stone, this river flowed. Its water was cool and clean, filtered through ancient rocks upstream. Fish lived in its deeper pools. Women from the village would come to wash clothes on its smooth stones, their laughter echoing across the water. Children learned to swim in its gentle currents under the watchful eyes of their elders. At dawn, when the mist rose from the river's surface like the breath of sleeping gods, the place became almost otherworldly in its beauty. Herons would stand motionless in the shallows, their reflections perfect in the still water. Kingfishers would dive from overhanging branches, emerging with silver fish flashing in their beaks. Dragonflies would skim the surface, their wings catching the first light of day like fragments of rainbow. This was paradise, this was peace, this was everything Moussa had ever needed or wanted. But he had lived long enough to know that beauty could be dangerous. In a country where corruption had rotted the institutions from within, where powerful men saw ordinary citizens as nothing more than obstacles to their greed, beauty attracted the wrong kind of attention. And Moussa's farm, with its prime location and never-failing water source, had caught the eye of a predator. 300 kilometers away, in the gleaming capital city of Ouagadougou, Minister Diallo sat in his penthouse office on the 23rd floor of the newest government building. Floor-to-ceiling, windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, but Diallo rarely looked at the streets. He had no interest in the people who lived there, the vendors struggling to make ends meet, the children walking miles to school. He looked beyond the city, toward the rural areas where land could still be taken if you knew the right people to bribe. Diallo was 45 years old and had never worked an honest day in his life. He had climbed to power through connections, blackmail, and strategic marriages. His official salary was modest by international standards, yet he owned 3 mansions, a fleet of luxury vehicles, and had bank accounts in 5 different countries. Nobody asked where the money came from. Those who asked too many questions tended to disappear from public life, reassigned to remote postings, or suddenly deciding to retire early. The minister's office was a temple to excess. The desk was imported Italian marble, so heavy that the building's engineer had to reinforce the floor beneath it. The chairs were wrapped in leather from Argentina. The walls displayed art that had mysteriously vanished from national museums during his tenure. A bar in the corner held bottles of whiskey worth more than most Burkina Faso earned in a year. The air conditioning kept the room so cold that Diallo wore a cashmere sweater indoors, while people outside wilted in the heat. On this particular morning, Diallo was studying a map spread across his massive desk. Not just any map, but a detailed survey of the southern provinces, marked with red circles and annotations. Each circle represented a piece of land he had identified for acquisition. Some he had already taken through forged documents. Others were in progress. But the one that had captured his attention most intensely was a small parcel next to a winding river. He traced the river's path with one manicured finger, his eyes gleaming with calculation. The location was perfect, close enough to the main highway for easy access but far enough from major towns to avoid immediate scrutiny. The river meant unlimited water supply. The flat land meant easy construction. And the view would be spectacular. Diallo's vision was grand and grotesque. He wanted to build a private resort, a playground for corrupt officials and wealthy businessmen, swimming pools fed by the river, air-conditioned villas with imported fixtures, a golf course where ministers could make deals away from prying eyes, maybe even a small airstrip for those who wanted to arrive discreetly. He had already lined up investors, men as corrupt as himself, who saw the profit potential in a luxury escape where they could spend their stolen money in peace. There was just one tiny problem, barely worth mentioning in Diallo's mind. An old man lived there, a nobody farmer who actually thought he had rights. 3 months earlier, Diallo had sent his first team to handle the situation. 3 men in expensive suits had arrived at Moussa's farm in a black Mercedes, looking absurdly out of place among the chickens and crops. They had introduced themselves as representatives of the Ministry of Development, speaking in the polished tones of men who had practiced lying in mirrors. They told Moussa that the government needed his land for a critical infrastructure project. They used words like modernization and national development and economic progress. They spoke of jobs that would be created, benefits that would flow to the community. Then they opened a briefcase filled with cash. Not nearly enough to buy equivalent land elsewhere, but more money than Moussa had seen in one place in his entire life. Moussa had listened politely, as was his way. He had offered them water and a place to sit in the shade. He had let them finish their rehearsed speech, and then with the quiet dignity of a man who knew his own worth, he had declined. "Gentlemen," he had said in his weathered voice, "I thank you for your offer, but this land is not for sale. My grandfather is buried under that baobab tree. My father rests beside him. My mother lies there too. This soil knows my family's bones. You are asking me to sell my ancestors' graves. No amount of money can buy that." He had explained that he understood their position, that he respected the government, but that there must be other land available. Land that did not hold 3 generations of the dead. Land that had not been worked by the same family for 7 decades. The men in suits had not appreciated his polite refusal. Their smiles had vanished like morning mist. The lead negotiator, a thin man with cold eyes, had leaned forward. "Old man," he had said, all pretense of respect gone, "you don't understand how things work. This is not really a negotiation. The minister has decided he wants this land. You can take the money and leave with dignity, or you can refuse and leave with nothing. Those are your only choices." Moussa had stood firm. "Then I choose to keep what is mine. This land has papers, legal papers, papers signed by the old government, registered properly. I am within my rights." The thin man had laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Rights? You think you have rights? We can change any papers we want. We can make your name disappear from every registry in the country. And who will you complain to? The police. They work for us. The judges. The minister plays golf with them." But Moussa had not backed down, and eventually the men had left, driving away in their Mercedes with barely concealed anger. Moussa had thought that would be the end of it. Surely they would find another location. Surely they would not risk the bad publicity of evicting an old man from his family farm. He had been wrong. Back in his office, when his agents returned empty-handed, Diallo had flown into a rage. He had thrown a crystal paperweight against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces that his secretary had to sweep up while he screamed about the audacity of peasants who did not know their place. "I made him a generous offer," Diallo had shouted, though everyone present knew the offer had been insultingly low. "I tried to do this the civilized way, but if this old fool wants to play hardball, I will crush him like the insect he is." That was when Diallo had decided to use his network of corruption to simply steal what he could not buy. It was surprisingly easy. Burkina Faso's land registry system was still partially paper-based, stored in filing cabinets in dusty offices. The clerks who managed these records were underpaid and overworked, easy targets for bribery. Diallo had sent a different kind of representative this time. Not men in suits, but men in shadows. They had arrived at the land registry office in the provincial capital with envelopes full of cash and explicit instructions. For the price of 2 months' salary, a clerk had removed Moussa's original deed from the files and replaced it with a new one. This forgery claimed the land had been legally transferred to Diallo Holdings Limited for purposes of national development, compensation paid in full. The stamps looked real because they were real, stolen from the registrar's office. The signatures looked authentic because they were traced from actual government documents. The paper was aged to match surrounding files. Unless someone knew exactly what to look for, the forgery was perfect. With his fake deed secured, Diallo had moved to phase 2 of his plan. If the law would not give him the land, he would use intimidation. And if intimidation failed, he would use force. The deadline arrived on a Wednesday morning. Moussa had been hoping, praying even, that somehow the problem would resolve itself. Perhaps the minister would lose interest. Perhaps some higher authority would intervene. Perhaps it had all been a terrible misunderstanding that would be cleared up once the right people looked at his legitimate papers. He should have known better. At 9 o'clock, the peaceful silence of the farm was shattered by the roar of engines. 3 massive SUVs, black and menacing, came tearing down the dirt road that led to Moussa's property. They were not police vehicles. They bore no government markings. These were private security, the kind of men who asked no questions and followed any orders as long as the payment was good. The SUVs skidded to a halt in front of Moussa's modest farmhouse, their oversized tires churning up clouds of red dust that drifted across the carefully tended fields. Doors flew open, and out stepped 6 men who looked like they had been assembled in a factory that built thugs. They were massive, all of them, with the kind of muscle that came from steroids and gym time, not from honest work. They wore black tactical gear that was mostly for show cargo. Pants with unnecessary pockets, boots designed to intimidate. 2 of them carried batons openly. All of them wore sunglasses despite the morning shade, and their faces held the casual cruelty of men who enjoyed their work. The leader was the largest, a man whose neck was thicker than most people's thighs. He approached Moussa with a swagger that said he had never lost a fight because he had never fought anyone who could fight back. In his hand, he carried a manila folder containing the forged documents. Moussa stood on his front porch, his hands trembling not from fear, but from a rage so profound it made his whole body shake. Behind him, his family had gathered, his sons ready to defend their home, his daughters-in-law holding the children back, keeping them inside where they would not see what might happen. "You Moussa," the leader barked, not bothering with greetings or respect. "I am," Moussa replied, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "Good, makes this easier. You've been squatting on government property. We're here to inform you that you have 48 hours to vacate these premises. Everything. Your family, your animals, your belongings, gone, you understand." Moussa blinked in confusion. "Squatting? This is my land, my family's land. I have papers." "Your papers are garbage," the thug interrupted, throwing the manila folder at Moussa's feet. Documents spilled out onto the dusty ground. "These are the real papers, signed, sealed, and legal. This land belongs to Diallo Holdings now. It was purchased for a vital national project. You were compensated fairly. Time to go." Moussa bent down, his old knees protesting, and picked up the documents with shaking hands. He recognized none of it. The signature that was supposedly his looked nothing like his actual writing. The date was wrong. The compensation amount listed was a fantasy. He had never received a single franc. "This is a lie," Moussa said, his voice rising. "I never signed this. I never sold anything. This is fraud." The leader smiled, a terrible sight that showed too many teeth and zero humanity. "That's your story, old man. This is ours. And our story has official stamps and government signatures. Whose story do you think matters more?" One of the other thugs stepped forward, slapping his baton against his palm in a gesture clearly meant to threaten. "The boss has been very patient with you, very generous. He even tried to buy this dump legally, offered you good money. You refused, so now you get nothing, just 48 hours to disappear." Moussa tried to maintain his dignity, tried to speak reason to men who had no reason in them. "Please, let me speak to someone in authority. Let me show them my original deed. There's been a mistake, a terrible mistake. I am a loyal citizen. I vote. I pay my taxes. I obey the law." "You want to talk to someone in authority?" the leader interrupted, stepping close enough that Moussa could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Fine, go to the police. We'll even give you a ride. But I promise you, old fool, the cops are going to look at these papers." He tapped the forged documents. "And then they're going to look at you, and they're going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you. This land belongs to Minister Diallo now, and if you're still here on Friday noon, we're coming back with equipment. Big equipment, and we won't ask nicely to move your stuff. We'll bury it where it stands." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Oh, and old man, don't try anything stupid. Don't try to fight. Don't try to hide. The minister owns this town. He owns the police. He owns the judges. He owns everything. You're nobody, just another peasant who doesn't know when he's beaten." The SUVs departed the way they came, engines roaring, leaving a cloud of dust and despair in their wake. As the sound faded into the distance, Moussa stood alone on his porch, holding papers that claimed to steal his life's work, surrounded by family members who looked to him for answers he did not have. His eldest son, Amadou, put a hand on his father's shoulder. "Papa, what do we do?" Moussa looked at his son, then at the fields beyond, then at the baobab tree where his ancestors rested. "We fight," he said quietly. "We fight because we have no choice." But in his heart, even as he said those words, Moussa wondered what chance an old farmer had against a system designed to crush him. Despite the warnings, despite the threats, Moussa believed in one thing: the law. He had lived his entire life as an honest citizen. He had never cheated, never stolen, never deliberately harmed another person. Surely, the system would protect him if he just followed the proper channels. On Thursday morning, Moussa dressed in his best clothes. His only dress shirt, white cotton with a frayed collar that his wife had mended so many times the thread pattern looked like a map. His one pair of formal trousers, kept in a trunk and only brought out for weddings and funerals. His leather shoes that had been resoled 3 times and still pinched his feet because they had been bought 30 years ago when his feet were younger. He looked at himself in the small, cracked mirror that hung on his bedroom wall and barely recognized the man staring back. When had he become so old? When had his hair turned completely white? When had these deep valleys appeared in his face? But his eyes, at least, still held determination. He would not go down without a fight. The walk to the provincial police station was 5 miles. Moussa did not own a car, and the public transport did not run to his remote farm. So he walked, carrying his precious original deed in a plastic bag to protect it from dust. The morning sun beat down mercilessly. By the time he reached the town, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his feet were blistering in his too tight shoes. The police station was a low concrete building painted in peeling yellow and green, the national colors fading under years of harsh sun. A Burkina Faso flag hung limp from a pole out front. Two officers sat outside on plastic chairs, smoking cigarettes and laughing at something on a mobile phone. They looked up as Moussa approached, their laughter dying. Moussa could read their expressions clearly. Annoyance, boredom. A peasant with a problem was the last thing they wanted to deal with on a hot morning. "Please," Moussa said, slightly out of breath from his long walk. "I need to report a crime. I need to speak with the station commander." One of the officers, a young man barely out of his 20s, looked Moussa up and down with obvious disdain. "Report a crime? What crime? Someone steal your chickens." "Someone is trying to steal my land," Moussa said with as much dignity as he could muster. "They have forged documents. They are threatening to destroy my home. I have the real papers here. I need help." The officers exchanged a look. The younger one stood up. "Wait here," he said, not kindly, and disappeared inside. Moussa waited in the sun for 20 minutes. He tried to stand in the small strip of shade cast by the building's overhang, but even that provided little relief. Finally, the young officer emerged and gestured for Moussa to follow. The station commander's office was barely cooler than outside. A small electric fan pushed hot air around the room. The commander himself was a heavy-set man in his 50s, his uniform stretched tight across his belly. His desk was cluttered with papers, empty tea glasses, and what looked like cash in an open drawer that he made no effort to hide. He did not stand when Moussa entered. He did not offer a chair. He simply looked up with hooded eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. "You're the farmer," he stated, not asked. "The one with the land dispute." "Yes, sir," Moussa said, hope flickering in his chest. At least he was being heard. "I am Moussa Sankara for 50 years. "I know who you are," the commander interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Minister Diallo's people called ahead, told me you might show up with some story about illegal eviction." Moussa's heart sank, but he pressed on. He carefully removed his original deed from the plastic bag and placed it on the commander's desk. "Sir, this is my legitimate deed. It's over 40 years old. You can see the original stamps, the original signatures, my father's name, then mine. The land has been in my family since independence. Those men who came yesterday, they have forgeries." The commander barely glanced at Moussa's deed. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out another document. Moussa recognized it immediately, the forged papers the thugs had thrown at his feet. "According to the official land registry," the commander said in a bored voice, "this property was legally transferred to Diallo Holdings 3 weeks ago. Full compensation was paid. The matter is closed." "But that's a lie," Moussa's voice cracked with desperation. "I never sold anything. I never received money. Someone forged my signature." The commander finally looked directly at Moussa, and in his eyes, Moussa saw the truth. This man knew. He knew it was fraud, knew it was theft, knew it was wrong, and he did not care. "Old man," the commander said slowly, as if explaining something to a child, "let me tell you how things work. Minister Diallo is a very important person. He does important work for this country. Sometimes, for the greater good, individual sacrifices must be made. Your land has been designated for a crucial development project. Jobs will be created. Investment will flow. The economy will benefit. One old farmer's personal feelings cannot stand in the way of progress." "But the law," Moussa started. "The law," the commander said, his voice hardening, "is what I say it is in this district. And I say you no longer have legal claim to that property. The new deed is registered. The old one," he flicked Moussa's precious document with one finger, "is invalid. Maybe your grandfather made some error in the original registration. Maybe the papers were never filed correctly. Who knows? Doesn't matter. What matters is the current official record, and that record says you're trespassing." He stood up now, his bulk seeming to fill the small office. "So here's what's going to happen. You have until tomorrow at noon to remove yourself and your family from that property. If you're still there when Minister Diallo's construction crew arrives, I will personally come and arrest you for trespassing on government land. You'll spend the next 6 months in a cell while lawyers sort it out. And believe me, old man, you do not want to spend your final years in one of our prisons." Moussa felt the world spinning. "Please," he whispered, all his pride gone, reduced to begging. Please, there must be something you can do, some investigation you can launch, someone higher up I can appeal to. The commander's laugh was harsh and cold. Investigate Minister Diallo? Are you insane? Do you know who his friends are? The governor is his cousin. The regional military commander plays golf with him every Sunday. The judges in the high court owe him favors. If I even pretended to investigate him, I'd be directing traffic in the desert by next week. He walked around his desk and opened the door, a clear signal that the conversation was over. My advice? Take whatever you can carry and find somewhere else to live. Maybe one of your children can take you in. Maybe there's a cousin in another province. I don't know and I don't care, but you need to accept reality. You lost. Minister Diallo won. That's just how life works sometimes. Moussa walked out of the station in a daze. The sun seemed brighter, the heat more oppressive. His carefully preserved deed felt like ashes in his hands. He had gone to the law for protection and found only corruption. He had sought justice and found only power. The 5-mile walk back to his farm felt like 500. His feet, already sore, blistered further. His throat was parched, but he had no money for water and too much pride to beg. When he finally stumbled up to his farmhouse, his family was waiting anxiously on the porch. One look at his face told them everything they needed to know. His wife, Fatima, who had been his partner for 45 years, began to cry softly. His sons looked at each other, anger and helplessness warring on their faces. His daughters-in-law started packing, tears streaming down their faces as they gathered children's clothes and cooking pots. But one person wasn't packing. Moussa's 19-year-old grandson, Ali, sat at the small kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen he had borrowed from a neighbor. While the rest of the family surrendered to despair, Ali was writing. He had seen something on his phone a few weeks ago, a video that had gone viral. It showed President Ibrahim Traoré visiting a remote village, eating with common soldiers, sleeping on the ground with his troops. In one clip, the president had shouted at a corrupt mayor, firing him on the spot for stealing funds meant for a school. He's different, Ali had told his friends. This one actually cares about regular people. Now, as his family prepared to abandon their ancestral home, Ali was betting everything on that hope. He was writing a letter to a president he had never met, telling the truth about a crime he could not stop, praying that somehow, someway, this message would reach someone who cared. The letter was simple, written in the barely legible handwriting of someone who had only made it to 8th grade before having to work the farm full-time. Your Excellency President Traoré, my name is Ali Sankara. My grandfather is about to lose everything to a corrupt minister named Diallo. He is taking our land with fake papers. The police will not help us. We have nowhere to go. If you are truly a president for all Burkina Faso, please help us. The bulldozers come tomorrow at noon. We are dying here, please. Ali Sankara, Southern Province. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't formal, but it was true, and in a country drowning in lies, truth was revolutionary. Ali folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he walked out to the main highway and waited. For 3 hours, he watched vehicles pass by, trucks, cars, motorcycles. Finally, he saw what he was looking for, a military supply convoy heading back to the capital. He flagged down the lead truck, running into the road with his arms waving. The driver, a young corporal named Ouedraogo, stopped and leaned out the window. Kid, are you trying to get yourself killed? Ali ran to the driver's side, breathless. Please, sir, please, I have a letter for President Traoré. It's about my grandfather. A minister is stealing our land. Please, you have to get this to the president, please. The corporal looked at the desperate teenager, then at the crumpled letter being shoved through his window. Kid, I can't promise anything. The president has a milio. And people trying to... Please, Ali begged, tears streaming down his face now. They come tomorrow at noon. If he doesn't see this, we lose everything. Please, just try, please. Something in the boy's face, something in his absolute desperation, moved the corporal. He took the letter. I'll try, kid. That's all I can promise. I'll try. The convoy pulled away, leaving Ali standing alone on the roadside as the sun began to set. He walked back to the farm where his family was spending what they believed would be their last night in the only home they had ever known. But at that moment, 200 kilometers away in the capital, Corporal Ouedraogo was not forgetting his promise. He knew a sergeant who knew a captain who knew someone in the presidential guard. By midnight, That crumpled letter had been smoothed out and placed on a wooden desk in a small office where Ibrahim Traoré, despite the late hour, was still working. The president read the letter once, then again, then he picked up his phone. What happened next would become the stuff of legend. That night, while Moussa's family tried to sleep in a house they believed they would lose by morning, hundreds of kilometers away in Ouagadougou, a different kind of restlessness kept Ibrahim Traoré awake. The presidential residence was quiet at 2 in the morning. Most of the staff had gone home. The guards outside stood at their posts, alert but bored in the peaceful darkness. Inside his private office, a modest room that deliberately contrasted with the opulence favored by previous leaders, Traoré sat beneath a single desk lamp, surrounded by reports. He was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes from carrying the weight of an entire nation on your shoulders. He had spent the day in meetings with security officials discussing the ongoing fight against terrorist groups in the north. He had reviewed budget proposals for new schools. He had fielded calls from foreign diplomats making promises they would not keep. He had eaten one meal, standing up between appointments. Now, in the quiet hours before dawn, he was catching up on intelligence reports, crime statistics, corruption allegations, citizen complaints. This was the work most presidents delegated to underlings, but Traoré insisted on reading them himself. He believed that the moment a leader stopped listening to his people was the moment he stopped being worthy of leadership. The pile of papers on his desk was depressingly large. Reports of police brutality in the eastern provinces, evidence of kickback schemes in government construction projects, allegations of vote buying in recent local elections. Sometimes, reading these reports, Traoré wondered if the rot went so deep that even he, with all his revolutionary fervor, could not root it out. Then his fingers touched a piece of paper different from the rest. Not an official report on letterhead, but a handwritten note on cheap lined paper, the kind sold in village markets for a few francs. The handwriting was messy, almost childlike, with words misspelled and letters formed uncertainly. Traoré began to read, and as he did, his exhaustion fell away, replaced by a cold, focused anger. He read the letter once, absorbing the facts. Then he read it again, slower this time, seeing between the lines. A desperate grandson writing to a president he had probably never met on behalf of a grandfather who had run out of options. A powerful minister stealing land through forged documents. Local police refusing to help because they were paid to look the other way. A bulldozer scheduled for noon the next day. Traoré checked his watch. It was 2:17 a.m. Noon was less than 10 hours away. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping capital. Somewhere in this city, Minister Diallo was probably sleeping peacefully in his air-conditioned mansion, dreaming of his luxury resort, confident that he was untouchable. Traoré had fought in wars. He had survived assassination attempts. He had toppled a corrupt government through sheer force of will, but nothing made his blood boil quite like bullies, men who used their power to crush those weaker than themselves, officials who thought their titles made them gods. He had not seized power to become another dictator. He had done it to build something better, to create a country where an old farmer could stand on his own land without fear, where justice was not something you could buy with bribes, where the law protected everyone, not just the wealthy and connected. And here, in this crumpled letter from a village he had never visited, was a test of everything he claimed to believe. Traoré pressed the intercom button on his desk. After a moment, a sleepy voice answered, "Yes, Mr. President." "Wake up Captain Ouagadougou, tell him to prepare one vehicle. No motorcade, no flags, no sirens. One vehicle, minimal security. We leave in 30 minutes. "Sir." "It's 2 in the morning. Where are we?" "Just do it," Traoré said, not harshly, but with unmistakable authority. "And get me everything we have on Minister Diallo, bank records, property holdings, known associates. I want it in 20 minutes. The voice on the other end was suddenly wide awake. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." 25 minutes later, Traoré walked out of the presidential residence wearing not a suit, but combat fatigues and his signature red beret. His head of security, Captain Ouagadougou, was waiting by a black unmarked SUV, looking deeply unhappy. "Mr. President," Ouagadougou said carefully, "with all respect, I must advise against this. We don't know what kind of security this minister has. He might have armed guards. This could be a trap. Please, let us send a team ahead." No time, Traoré interrupted, climbing into the passenger seat. The bulldozers come at noon. By the time we send a team, that family will be homeless and the evidence destroyed. Then at least take a full security detail. No motorcade, Traoré repeated firmly. If we show up with 20 vehicles and flashing lights, Diallo will have time to hide to call his friends to spin the story. We arrive fast and quiet. We catch him in the act. Sawadogo realized he was not going to win this argument. He climbed into the driver's seat, signaling the one security vehicle that would follow them. As they pulled out of the palace gates into the dark streets of Ouagadougou, he muttered under his breath about stubborn presidents who thought they were invincible. The drive would take 3 hours if they pushed the speed limit. Sawadogo pushed it further, the SUV eating up kilometers on the dark highway. Traoré spent the journey reading the file his intelligence service had compiled on Minister Diallo. It made for ugly reading. Diallo Holdings Limited owned 17 properties across the country, all acquired under suspicious circumstances. His official salary was 8 million CFA francs per year, about $13,000 USD, yet he owned mansions worth billions. He had bank accounts in Switzerland, France, and Dubai. His children attended private schools in Europe that cost more than most Burkina earned in a lifetime. But what caught Traoré's attention was a pattern. Over the past 5 years, Diallo had acquired 12 pieces of land, always using the same method. Forge documents, bribe registry clerks, send thugs to intimidate the owners. 3 families had already been displaced. In 2 cases, the original landowners had simply vanished, never heard from again. Traoré closed the folder, his jaw clenched. This was not just one corrupt minister. This was a systematic predator who had been operating with impunity for years, while previous governments looked the other way. "How much further?" he asked Sawadogo. 40 minutes, sir. We'll arrive around 5:30. Good, we'll have time to assess the situation before the bulldozers show up. As the SUV raced through the darkness, the sky behind them began to lighten. Dawn was coming, and with it, a reckoning that Minister Diallo would never forget. The bulldozers arrived precisely at 11:00 a.m., an hour before the deadline. 3 massive yellow machines, their engines rumbling like mechanical beasts, their metal blades gleaming in the harsh sun. Behind them came 2 flatbed trucks carrying additional equipment and a dozen laborers. And bringing up the rear, polished and gleaming, was Minister Diallo's personal SUV, a BMW X7 that cost more than most village houses. Moussa heard them before he saw them. That deep, earth-shaking rumble of diesel engines, a sound that did not belong in his peaceful farmland. He had been sitting under the baobab tree where his ancestors rested, one hand on the rough bark, saying what he believed would be his final goodbye. His family had spent the night packing. Not everything, there was no way to take everything, but the essentials: clothes, cooking pots, a few precious photographs in cracked frames, his father's old prayer beads, his mother's wedding bracelet. The things that made a house a home, reduced to bundles and boxes stacked by the door. Now, hearing that terrible mechanical thunder growing louder, Moussa stood up. His knees ached. His back protested. But he stood because even if he was going to lose, he would lose standing up. The convoy rolled up to his property like an invading army. The bulldozers positioned themselves in a semicircle facing his farmhouse. The operators killed the engines, and in the sudden silence that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath. Minister Diallo emerged from his SUV like a king surveying conquered territory. He wore a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost more than Moussa's entire year's harvest. Italian leather shoes that would be ruined by the first step in the red dust. Gold rings on multiple fingers catching the sunlight. Expensive sunglasses that hid his eyes but not his smug smile. He was accompanied by 2 bodyguards, massive men in black suits that barely contained their muscles. Following behind was a nervous-looking man in a cheaper suit carrying a camera and a clipboard, a lawyer or bureaucrat brought along to make this theft look legal. Diallo did not even look at Moussa directly at first. He surveyed the property like a prospective buyer at an auction, nodding appreciatively at the river, examining the flat land, calculating profit margins in his head. "Perfect," he said to no one in particular. "The pool will go there overlooking the river, the main building here where we have the best view, maybe a helipad in that field." He spoke casually, as if the people who actually lived here were already ghosts. Moussa stepped forward, his hands trembling but his voice steady. Minister Diallo, please, I am begging you, find another location. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. Our ancestors are buried here. We have nowhere else to go. Diallo finally acknowledged Musa's existence, turning to look at him with the expression one might give an annoying insect. Still here, old man? I thought I made myself clear. You had 48 hours to vacate. That time is up. Frankly, I'm disappointed. I expected you to have some dignity and leave quietly. This is my land, Musa said, pulling out his original deed with shaking hands. I have proof, legal proof. Your papers are forgeries. Forgeries? Diallo laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He turned to his lawyer. Did you hear that? He's calling official government documents forgeries. That's quite serious. That's possibly sedition, accusing the government of fraud. The lawyer, eager to please his powerful patron, nodded vigorously. Very serious, Minister. We could press charges. Diallo waved his hand dismissively. Not worth the trouble. The old fool will be gone soon enough anyway. He pulled out his phone and checked the time with exaggerated casualness. It's 11:30. I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you 30 more minutes to clear out. Take your chickens, your cooking pots, whatever. But at noon, those bulldozers start working if you or your family are in the way. He shrugged. Well, I can't be held responsible for accidents. Musa's eldest son, Amadou, stepped forward, his fists clenched. You can't do this. We'll fight. We'll. One of Diallo's bodyguards moved forward, his hand resting meaningfully on something under his jacket. The threat was clear. Amadou, no, Musa said, grabbing his son's arm. He had already lost his land. He would not lose his son, too. Diallo smiled at this display of power. Smart man, now I have some calls to make. You have, he checked his watch again, 28 minutes. He walked back to his SUV to wait in air-conditioned comfort while his bulldozers did his dirty work. His men dispersed, some smoking cigarettes, others checking their phones. The bulldozer operators climbed into their machines, starting the engines. The rumble that had briefly fallen silent returned, louder now, more menacing. Musa looked at his family gathered on the porch. His wife was crying silently. His grandchildren were clinging to their mothers. His sons looked ready to fight even though fighting was hopeless. This was how it ended, not with justice but with power-crushing truth. He turned to face the lead bulldozer, its blade already beginning to rise. If they were going to take his land, they would have to go through him first. He grabbed an old shovel leaning against the fence. Ironically, the same shovel his father had used to first break this ground 50 years ago and stood between the bulldozer and his home. Please, he shouted over the engine noise. Please, this is all I have. The bulldozer operator, a local man named Kane who had worked on various construction projects, hesitated. He could see the old man's face, see the tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Kane had a father too, about the same age. He imagined his own father standing there, desperate and defeated. He looked over at Minister Diallo, hoping for some sign of mercy, some recognition of the cruelty of what they were about to do. Diallo, seeing the hesitation, leaned out of his SUV window. What are you waiting for? He shouted. Drive. If the old fool wants to be martyred for a piece of dirt, that's his choice. Kane looked at Musa, then at the minister, then at his own hands on the controls. He needed this job. He had children to feed. The minister paid well and fired quickly. He shifted the massive machine into gear. The bulldozer lurched forward, its treads chewing up earth. The blade lowered to demolish the wooden fence Musa's father had built. The sound of splintering wood cut through the air like a scream. Musa's grandson Ali ran forward, grabbing his grandfather, trying to pull him to safety. Jada, please, you'll be killed. Musa allowed himself to be pulled back, collapsing into his grandson's arms. The bulldozer crushed the fence like it was made of matchsticks, the Roman 6. Lagers who had gathered to watch covered their mouths in horror. Some of the women were openly weeping. Minister Diallo stepped out of his SUV to watch the destruction with satisfaction. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and smiled. Finally, he muttered, I've wasted enough time on these peasants. He turned to his assistant. Make sure you document everything. I want photos for the development proposal. This is going to make me. He never finished that sentence. From the main road, a new sound cut through the rumble of bulldozers. The high-pitched screech of tires pushed beyond their limits. Then, emerging from the dust cloud on the access road, a black SUV appeared, moving far too fast for safety. Diallo frowned, confused. Who the hell is that? The SUV didn't slow down. It accelerated, bouncing over the rough terrain, its suspension protesting, dust flying up behind it like a cape. It was heading straight for the bulldozers. "Is that idiot crazy?" Diallo muttered. "He's going to crash." The SUV swerved hard at the last possible moment, its tires screaming, and slammed to a stop directly in front of the lead bulldozer. If the operator hadn't stomped on the brakes, the massive machine would have crushed the vehicle flat. Everything stopped. The bulldozers idled down, the workers froze, even the wind seemed to pause. Minister Diallo's confusion turned to anger. Someone had interrupted his moment of triumph. He threw down his cigarette and ground it under his expensive shoe, marching toward the mysterious vehicle. "Are you insane?" he shouted, his voice shrill with rage. "Do you know whose operation you're interrupting? I am Minister Diallo. Move this piece of junk immediately or I will have you arrested." The SUV sat silent, engine humming quietly. Its tinted windows revealed nothing. Diallo's bodyguards moved forward, hands moving to their holsters. The minister slapped his palm against the hood of the vehicle. "I gave you an order. Get out now." Still nothing. Diallo leaned closer to the driver's window, his face red with fury. "This is your last warning." The rear door opened. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just a slow, deliberate click of the latch and then the door swung open. A pair of military boots touched the red dust, then legs in combat fatigues, then a tactical vest, then a red beret. And finally, a face that made Minister Diallo's words die in his throat. Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the vehicle and stood in the dust of Moussa's farm, his eyes scanning the scene with the focused intensity of a predator assessing prey. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Minister Diallo took a step back, his expensive shoes stumbling slightly. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Your Excellency, what? Why are you?" Traoré's gaze moved past the minister as if he were invisible. His eyes found Moussa, still kneeling in the dust where his grandson had pulled him, tears streaming down his weathered face. For a long moment, the president of Burkina Faso and the old farmer simply looked at each other. Then Traoré walked forward, not toward the minister who had been shouting, but toward the old man who had been crying. His boots left deep prints in the red earth as he crossed the distance between them. Diallo tried to follow, tried to speak, tried to explain, but one of Traoré's security men who had emerged from the vehicle behind him placed a firm hand on the minister's chest. "Stay," the soldier said quietly. It was not a request. Traoré reached Moussa and did something that would be captured on video and shared millions of times in the coming days. He knelt down in the dust, in his military fatigues, and placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "Stand up, father," he said, his voice carrying across the silent farm. "In this country, an honest man kneels to no one but God." Moussa looked up through his tears at the face of the man who had traveled through the night to save him. For a moment, he could not believe it was real. Surely this was exhaustion, grief playing tricks on his mind. The president of Burkina Faso could not actually be kneeling in the dust of his farm, helping him to his feet. But the hand on his shoulder was solid and real. The grip was strong as Traoré helped him stand. And when Moussa was on his feet, the president did not let go immediately. He brushed the dust from Moussa's shoulders with the same care a son might show an aging father. They have papers," Moussa stammered, his voice hoarse. "Official papers, they say the land is theirs." Traoré's expression hardened. The compassion he had shown Moussa vanished, replaced by cold steel. He turned to face Minister Diallo, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Papers, show them to me, now." Minister Diallo had recovered some of his composure. He was a survivor, a man who had talked his way out of trouble before. He put on his most professional smile, the one he used with foreign investors and skeptical journalists. "Your Excellency, what a surprise to see you here. I must apologize for the confusion. This is simply a routine land acquisition for a vital tourism development project. Everything is completely legal and proper. The old gentleman was fairly compensated." "I did not ask for a speech," Traoré interrupted, his voice quiet but cutting. "I asked to see the papers." Diallo snapped his fingers at his lawyer, who rushed forward with the manila folder containing the forged documents. Diallo handed them to Traoré with the confidence of a man who believed his forgery was perfect. "As you can see, Your Excellency, everything is in order." The land was legally purchased, properly registered, full compensation provided. This area has been designated for development that will bring jobs and investment. Traoré was not listening to the sales pitch. He was reading the documents with the careful attention of someone trained to spot lies. He flipped through the pages slowly, his finger tracing certain lines, his eyes narrowing at specific details. The silence stretched out. Minister Diallo began to sweat despite the shade. His lawyer shifted nervously. The bulldozer operators watched from their machines, sensing that something significant was happening but not understanding what. "This deed," Traoré finally said, tapping the paper, "claims the land was sold last Tuesday, Tuesday the 14th. "Yes, Your Excellency, that's correct." "But I have a letter here." Traoré pulled Ali's crumpled note from his pocket. "Written by this man's grandson. It describes thugs coming to this farm on Tuesday the 14th to threaten the family because the grandfather refused to sell." Diallo's smile wavered. "Well, that's clearly a misunderstanding. Perhaps the dates are confused. So on the same day you claim you bought the land legally, you were also sending armed men to threaten the seller. Does that make sense to you, Minister?" There may have been some overzealous employees. Security concerns, you know how it is." "No," Traoré said flatly. "I don't know how it is, explain it to me." Diallo was starting to panic. He could see his perfect plan unraveling. "Your Excellency, with all respect, this is really a local administrative matter. Perhaps we could discuss this in private in the capital where we could review." Traoré held up his hand for silence. He was still reading. Then his eyes stopped on a specific line. He read it twice, and a grim smile appeared on his face. "Minister Diallo, this is very interesting. According to this deed, the land was purchased by the government for public development purposes, correct?" "Yes, exactly, for the greater good of—" "Then why," Traoré's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "does line 17 list the new owner as Diallo Holdings Limited?" The silence that followed was total. Even the wind seemed to stop. Every person present understood what had just been revealed. The minister had been so arrogant, so certain he would never be caught, that he had put his own shell company's name on the forged deed. Diallo's face went through several colors, red, white, purple. There must be a clerical error. My office handles many properties. Someone must have used the wrong form." "A clerical error," Traoré repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "You steal a man's land with forged documents, threaten his family with violence, bribe government officials to make it look legal, and you want me to believe your name appearing as the owner is a clerical error." He dropped the papers, did not hand them back, simply let them fall into the dust where they belonged. They fluttered down like dead leaves, settling in the red earth they had falsely claimed to own. Traoré stepped closer to Diallo, invading his personal space. The minister tried to back away, but found one of the security officers standing behind him, blocking his retreat. "You thought," Traoré said, his voice low and controlled, "that because you sit in an air-conditioned office and wear expensive suits, you could steal the ground from under a man who feeds this nation. You thought your connections would protect you. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I wouldn't care." "Your Excellency, please, let's be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Traoré's voice rose now. "You want to talk about reasonable? This man is 70 years old. He has worked this land for 50 years. His father and grandfather are buried here. He grows food that feeds half a village. And you wanted to take it so you could build what? A playground for corrupt ministers. A place where you and your thief friends could spend stolen money in comfort." Minister Diallo was sweating profusely now. His expensive suit was soaked through. His hands were shaking. "Please, Your Excellency, there must be some way we can resolve this. I can make this right. I can compensate the family generously. I can." "Oh, you'll make this right," Traoré said, his voice deadly cal. But not with money, not with more lies. You're going to fix this the old-fashioned way." He turned to the bulldozer operator who was still sitting in his machine. "You, get down here, now." Kane scrambled down from the bulldozer, terrified. "Sir, I was just following orders. I have a family, please." "I know," Traoré said, not unkindly. "And because you have a family, you should understand better than anyone why destroying another man's home is wrong. Who paid for the fuel in that machine?" Kane pointed at Minister Diallo with a shaking hand. "The minister, sir." Traoré nodded. He walked over to where Moussa kept his tools and picked up the old shovel, the one Moussa had tried to use to stop the bulldozer. He walked back to Minister Diallo and shoved the shovel into his chest. "You broke this man's fence. You destroyed his property. Before you go anywhere, you're going to fix it with your own hands." The words hung in the air like a thunderbolt. Everyone present understood what was about to happen. Minister Diallo, one of the most powerful men in the province, was being ordered to do manual labor. I can't. I'm a government minister," Diallo stammered. "You were a government minister," Traoré corrected coldly. "As of this moment, you're suspended from all duties pending investigation, and if you think I'm joking about the fence, test me. See what happens." Diallo looked at the shovel in his hands like it was a poisonous snake. He looked at the pile of broken fence posts. He looked at the security officers surrounding him. He realized, finally, that there was no way out. With trembling hands, he removed his expensive linen jacket and dropped it in the dust. He rolled up the sleeves of his silk shirt, and then, watched by his bodyguards, his lawyer, the bulldozer operators, Moussa's family, and most humiliatingly, the president himself, Minister Diallo jammed the shovel into the hard earth and began to dig. It was pathetic. His soft hands, which had never done real work, blistered within minutes. His expensive shoes sank into the mud near the river where he had to retrieve broken posts. Sweat poured down his face, streaking his carefully groomed hair. His back, unused to bending, screamed in protest. For 30 minutes, he worked under the merciless sun while the entire village gathered to watch. People who had been forced off their own land by similar schemes. Farmers who had lost crops to corrupt officials. Women whose husbands had been beaten for standing up to powerful men. They all came to witness something they had never thought possible, a corrupt minister being humbled. When Diallo finally managed to reset the fence post, his hands were bleeding, his clothes were ruined, and his pride was completely shattered. He dropped the shovel and fell to his knees, gasping for air. Traoré did not offer him water. He turned to Moussa. "Father, is the work acceptable?" Moussa, who had watched in stunned silence, slowly nodded. A smile spread across his weathered face. "It will hold, Mr. President, it will hold." Traoré reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a pen. He picked up Diallo's forged deed from the dust where it had fallen. He held it up for everyone to see, then deliberately tore it in half. Then in half again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti falling in the wind. "This land is yours, Moussa," Traoré declared, his voice carrying across the farm so everyone could hear. "It belongs to you until the day you die, and it will belong to your children after that. No one will ever touch it again. I guarantee it personally." Then he turned back to Diallo, who was still kneeling in the dirt, broken and exhausted. "Captain," Traoré called to his security chief. "Arrest this man. Charges, fraud, forgery, corruption, abuse of office, and attempted theft of state resources, and confiscate that SUV. It was bought with stolen money. It belongs to the people now." 2 military police officers stepped forward with handcuffs, not the ceremonial kind used in photo ops, but heavy steel restraints. They clicked tight around Diallo's wrists. As they dragged the weeping minister toward the military truck, the villagers finally let loose. Cheers erupted across the fields. People were crying, laughing, hugging each other. They had just witnessed the impossible. David had defeated Goliath. Truth had conquered power. But Traoré was not done yet. He knew that arresting one man would not fix a broken system. He needed to send a message that would echo through every corrupt office in the country. He walked over to Ali, the young man who had written the letter that started everything. The boy was staring at the president with wide, disbelieving eyes. "You did this," Traoré said, placing a hand on Ali's shoulder. "You didn't use violence, you didn't give up. You used the most powerful weapon we have, the truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal pen, the same one he had used to sign Diallo's suspension order. He pressed it into Ali's hand. "Keep writing," Traoré said. "Keep watching, keep telling the truth, because in Burkina Faso we are building something new. A country where one letter from one brave young man can bring down a corrupt minister. A country where the president listens to his people, not just his advisors." Ali clutched the pen like it was made of gold, tears streaming down his face. Traoré turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "If anyone, and I mean anyone, comes back here to threaten this family, you don't hide, you don't run. You call the presidential palace directly. This farm is now under my personal protection." He looked around at the faces watching him. Poor farmers, village elders, children who would remember this day for the rest of their lives. This was why he had fought. Not for power, not for glory, but for this, for justice in the dust, for the ability to look an old man in the eye and say, "You matter." Moussa approached with a clay cup of water, drawn fresh from the well that had almost been stolen. His hands trembled as he offered it to the president. Traoré's security detail tensed. Protocol said the president should not consume anything that had not been vetted, but Traoré waved them off. He took the cup with both hands, looked Moussa in the eye, and drank deeply. "That," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, "is better than any champagne they drink in the capital. That is the taste of freedom." The convoy finally prepared to depart. As Traoré climbed back into his SUV, he took one last look at the farm that had almost been destroyed. The fence that now stood again. The old farmer who stood tall on his own land. The young man who had dared to write a letter. This was what victory looked like. Not military parades or political speeches, but an old man watering his crops on land that was rightfully his. As the vehicles drove away, dust swirling in their wake, Traoré pulled out his phone. He had one more call to make, to the head of the Anti-Corruption Commission. "I'm sending you a case," he said when the director answered. "Minister Diallo, but I want you to expand the investigation. Check every land deal he's made in the last 10 years and cross-reference with other ministers using the same method. I want to know how deep this goes." He hung up and looked out the window at the countryside passing by. How many other families were being crushed right now by corrupt officials? How many more letters would it take? "Sir," Captain Sawadogo said from the driver's seat, "that was impressive, but you know this will make you enemies. Diallo has powerful friends." "I already have enemies," Traoré replied. "What's a few more? Besides, those powerful friends need to understand something. In the new Burkina Faso, power comes from the people, not from stolen money. They can either adapt or join Diallo in prison." He settled back in his seat, allowing himself a moment of exhaustion. He had not slept in over 24 hours, but it had been worth it. Every single minute. Back at the farm, as the dust settled and the sun began its descent toward evening, Moussa's family sat together under the baobab tree where their ancestors rested. They spoke in hushed tones, still not quite believing what had transpired. "Did that really happen?" Fatima asked her husband, touching his arm as if to make sure he was real. "Did the president really come here? Did we really win?" Moussa nodded slowly, looking at his calloused hands that still trembled with emotion. "It happened. God is great. Justice is possible." Ali sat apart from the others, staring at the pen the president had given him. It was a simple pen, nothing fancy, but it felt heavy with meaning. He had written one letter in desperation, never truly believing it would reach anyone important. And yet here he was, holding proof that his words had moved mountains. His younger sister Amina came and sat beside him. "You saved us," she said softly. "You saved our home." "No," Ali replied, his voice thick with emotion. "President Traoré saved us. I just told the truth." "That's what he said, isn't it?" Amina smiled. "That truth is the most powerful weapon." They sat in silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The maize in the fields rustled in the evening breeze, the same breeze that had always been there but somehow felt different now. Freer. Safer. In the capital city of Ouagadougou, news of Minister Diallo's arrest spread like wildfire. Within hours, the videos taken by villagers on their phones had gone viral. The images were stark and powerful, a corrupt minister on his knees, digging in the dirt, handcuffed and humiliated. And above all, President Traoré kneeling in the dust with an old farmer helping him to his feet. The presidential palace was flooded with calls. Some were congratulatory, ordinary citizens praising Traoré for standing with the people. But others were threatening, powerful officials. Warning him that he had crossed a line, that Diallo had friends, that there would be consequences. Traoré sat in his modest office that evening, ignoring the phones, reading through the files his intelligence service had compiled. As he suspected, Diallo's corruption was not an isolated incident. It was part of a network, a system that had been operating for decades. There was a knock on his door. His chief of staff, a thin man named Almer who had been with Traoré since the revolution, entered with a worried expression. "Mr. President, we have a problem. 3 other ministers have threatened to resign if you proceed with the investigation into Diallo. They're calling it a witch hunt." and the governor of the southern province has issued a statement defending Diallo's character. Traoré looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. Let them resign, and the governor start an investigation into his finances too. If he's defending Diallo, he's probably just as corrupt. Sir, if we lose 3 ministers, then we'll replace them with honest people, Traoré interrupted. Almer, I didn't risk my life in a revolution to preserve a system of thieves. If ministers think they can steal from the people and hide behind their titles, they're about to learn otherwise. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. How many farmers like Moussa are out there right now, losing their land to men like Diallo? How many families have already been destroyed while we look the other way? No more. This ends now. The people love what you did today, Almer said carefully. The videos have been shared millions of times. You're being called a hero, but the establishment can join Diallo in prison if they choose, Traoré said firmly. I'm not interested in being popular with corrupt officials. I'm interested in justice. Over the following weeks, the investigation into Minister Diallo revealed a web of corruption so extensive it shocked even the most cynical observers. The Anti-Corruption Commission worked around the clock, following paper trails, interviewing victims, analyzing bank records. They discovered that Diallo had stolen land from 12 families in the past 5 years alone. Some had been compensated with laughably small amounts. Others had received nothing at all. 2 families had been physically removed by armed men, their homes burned to prevent their return. But the investigation also revealed something more disturbing. Diallo had not been working alone. He was part of a network that included judges who approved fraudulent transfers, police chiefs who intimidated victims, registry clerks who doctored documents, and even some members of the former government who had received kickbacks. Traoré ordered mass arrests. Within a month, 15 government officials were behind bars, including 2 judges, 1 police commissioner, and a deputy governor. Their trials were public, broadcast on national television, so everyone could see that justice was no longer just for the poor. The man who had operated the bulldozer that day, Kane, was not arrested. Instead, Traoré had him brought to the presidential palace. The terrified operator thought he was going to prison. You had a choice, Traoré told him. You could have refused to destroy that old man's fence, but you did it anyway because you needed the job, because you have a family. I understand that. Poverty makes people do things they know are wrong. He handed Kane an envelope. This is a contract. You're going to work on government construction projects now, building schools and hospitals, not destroying homes. The pay is fair, and you'll never be asked to do anything corrupt. But if you ever participate in something like this again, you'll join Diallo in prison. Understood? Kane nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, Mr. President, thank you. I'll never, I promise. Good, Traoré said. Now go home to your family. And when your children ask what you do for work, you can tell them you build things, not destroy them. The impact of that single day in Moussa's farm spread far beyond one family or one province. All across Burkina Faso, people who had been victimized by corrupt officials began to come forward with their own stories. A widow in the northern province wrote a letter describing how a local official had stolen her husband's pension. A teacher in the east reported that the principal was selling teaching positions to the highest bidder. A doctor in a rural clinic documented how medical supplies meant for patients were being sold on the black market. The presidential palace received hundreds of letters each week. Traoré insisted on reading as many as he could personally, though his staff warned him it was impossible to address every complaint. Then we build a system that can, he told them. We create a hotline, a website, regional offices where people can report corruption without fear. We train investigators. We protect whistleblowers. We make it clear that in this country, the truth matters more than who has the most money. He also made regular trips to rural areas, arriving unannounced to inspect projects, meet with local leaders, and listen to ordinary citizens. His security detail hated these trips. They were dangerous, unpredictable, and made protection difficult. But Traoré insisted. How can I lead a country I don't know? He would say. These people aren't statistics in a report. They're real humans with real problems. I need to see them, hear them, understand them. 6 months after that fateful day, President Traoré returned to Moussa's farm. This time, his visit was planned. He came with engineers, agricultural experts, and representatives from the development bank. The farm looked different now. The fence was not just repaired but reinforced. The fields were thriving, green, and healthy. And standing proudly near the river was something new, a small cooperative processing center where farmers from surrounding villages could bring their harvest. Moussa, now looking healthier and more vibrant than he had in years, greeted the president with tears in his eyes. "Your Excellency, you've come back." "I made a promise," Traoré replied, embracing the old farmer. "I said this land would be protected. I keep my promises." He had brought more than just his presence. The government had allocated funds to help rural farmers improve their productivity. Moussa's farm would serve as a pilot project, modernizing irrigation, introducing better storage facilities, connecting farmers directly to markets without exploitative middlemen. "This is not charity," Traoré explained to the gathered crowd of farmers. "This is investment. You feed this nation. You deserve support, not exploitation. When you succeed, we all succeed." Ali, who had been working the fields alongside his grandfather, approached the president nervously. In the past 6 months, he had become something of a local celebrity, the boy who wrote the letter that changed everything. "Mr. President," he said shyly, "I've been writing more letters about problems in our school, about the clinic that needs medicine, about the road that washes out every rainy season." Traoré smiled. "Good, keep writing. But Ali, have you thought about your future? What do you want to do with your life?" Ali looked at the ground. "I only finished 8th grade, sir. I had to leave school to help on the farm. I'm not educated enough to—" "Nonsense," Traoré interrupted. "You had the courage to write to a president you'd never met. You had the intelligence to articulate a complex problem clearly. You had the determination to stand up to injustice. Those are not things taught in school. Those come from character." He pulled out an envelope and handed it to Ali. "This is a scholarship, full ride to the university in Ouagadougou. You can study journalism, law, agriculture, whatever you want. We need young people like you in this country, people who care about truth and justice." Ali's hands shook as he held the envelope. His mother, standing behind him, began to cry. His grandfather squeezed his shoulder with pride. "But sir," Ali stammered, "who will help my grandfather with the farm?" Moussa laughed, a deep, joyful sound. "Boy, I worked this land before you were born. I can manage a few more years. You go, you learn, you make us proud." As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the fields, Traoré sat with Moussa under the ancient baobab tree. They shared simple food, millet porridge, grilled fish from the river, fresh vegetables from the garden. No fancy dishes, no ceremonial formality, just 2 men talking. "Do you know why I came that day?" Traoré asked. "It wasn't just about the land, it was about what the land represents. Your family has been here for 3 generations. You fed this community for 50 years. You represent everything good about this country: hard work, dignity, generosity. If I couldn't protect you, what kind of president was I?" Moussa nodded slowly. Many presidents would not have come. Many would have sent assistance or ignored the letter completely. "I'm not many presidents," Traoré replied. "I remember what it's like to be powerless, to watch corrupt officials destroy lives while everyone looks away. I swore when I took power that I would never be that kind of leader." "But it's dangerous," Moussa said quietly. "Standing up to powerful people, Diallo had friends, they will want revenge." "Let them try," Traoré said, his voice hard. "I've survived worse than corrupt politicians, and besides, I have something they don't have, the support of people like you. As long as ordinary citizens believe in what we're building, no corrupt network can stop us." Minister Diallo's trial became the most watched event in Burkina Faso's history. It was held in a large public hall because the courthouse could not accommodate all the people who wanted to witness justice being served. Came. Roz broadcast every moment to the entire nation. Diallo had hired expensive lawyers, men in tailored suits who argued technicalities and procedural violations. They tried to claim their client was being politically persecuted, that he was a scapegoat for systemic problems, that the evidence was circumstantial. But the prosecution had something far more powerful than legal arguments. They had victims. One by one, people came forward to testify. An elderly couple who had lost their home of 40 years. A farmer who had been beaten by Diallo's security team. A widow whose husband had disappeared after refusing to sell his land. And finally, Moussa himself, who described in simple, devastating detail how he had almost lost everything. The lawyers tried to discredit the witnesses, to paint them as confused or mistaken. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents with Diallo's signature, bank records showing massive unexplained wealth, testimony from the registry clerks he had bribed, video of him ordering the bulldozers to destroy Moussa's fence. The verdict, when it came, surprised no one, guilty on all counts. The sentence, however, shocked everyone. The judge, a woman named Traoré who had built a reputation for toughness, looked directly at Diallo as she pronounced judgment. You were given a position of trust. You were meant to serve the people of Burkina Faso. Instead, you stole from them. You terrorized them. You used your power to enrich yourself while ordinary citizens struggled. This court finds that no punishment is too severe for such betrayal. She sentenced him to 15 years in prison to be served in a maximum security facility. All his assets would be confiscated and sold, with the proceeds used to compensate his victims. His properties would be transferred to the state and converted into public facilities, schools, clinics, community centers. When the sentence was read, Diallo collapsed in his chair, weeping. His expensive lawyers closed their briefcases in defeat. But in the gallery, the victims, Moussa among them, sat quietly with tears of relief streaming down their faces. Justice, real justice, had finally been served. 3 years after that day in the dust, Burkina Faso was a different country. It was not perfect, no country is. Corruption had not been completely eliminated. There were still officials who took bribes, police who looked the other way, judges who could be bought, but something fundamental had changed. The system was no longer rigged exclusively for the powerful. Ordinary people had a voice, and more importantly, they knew they had a voice. Moussa's farm had become a symbol of that change. Tourists and journalists came from across Africa to see the place where a president had knelt in the dust to defend an old farmer. The farm itself thrived, producing more food than ever before and serving as a training center where young farmers learned modern agricultural techniques. Moussa himself, now 73, still worked the fields every morning, though his sons and grandsons handled most of the heavy labor. He had become something of a local celebrity, often invited to speak at schools and community gatherings about perseverance and justice. Ali graduated from university with honors, earning a degree in journalism. He returned to his province not to farm, but to start a newspaper dedicated to reporting on local corruption and government accountability. His first major investigation exposed a scheme where officials were embezzling funds meant for rural schools. 3 officials went to prison as a result. I learned from the best, Ali told his grandfather when the paper won a national award. You taught me that one person speaking truth can change everything. President Traoré, meanwhile, faced the challenges that all reformers face. Some of his initiatives succeeded brilliantly. Others failed or were sabotaged by entrenched interests. He survived 2 assassination attempts, both allegedly linked to corrupt officials he had exposed. But he never stopped fighting. Every week, he read letters from citizens. Every month, he made unannounced visits to remote regions. Every year, more corrupt officials went to prison while honest public servants were promoted and rewarded. Critics accused him of being too aggressive, of moving too fast, of making too many enemies. His supporters said he was not moving fast enough, that corruption still thrived in many corners of government. He listened to both sides and tried to find the balance between idealism and pragmatism. On the 3rd anniversary of Moussa's salvation, Traoré returned to the farm once again. The entire village turned out to celebrate, roasting goats, playing music, dancing into the night. It had become an annual tradition, a reminder of what was possible when leaders actually led. As the sun set on that celebration, Moussa and Traoré stood together at the edge of the fields, looking out over the land that had almost been stolen. Do you ever regret it? Moussa asked. Standing up to powerful people, making so many enemies, putting yourself in danger. Traoré was quiet for a long moment, watching the river flow past, constant and eternal. No, he finally said. I regret the years before I had power when I watched injustice happen and could do nothing. I regret not acting sooner. I regret every family that suffered while leaders looked away. But standing up to bullies, defending honest people, that's what power is for. If you have the ability to help and you don't, you're not just useless, you're complicit. He turned to look at Moussa. You taught me something that day, when you stood in front of that bulldozer with nothing but a shovel. You taught me that courage isn't about being strong or fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified, even when you know you might lose. Moussa smiled, his weathered face crinkling. And you taught me that there are still leaders who remember they're human, who remember that power is a responsibility, not a privilege. They stood in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Around them, the celebration continued, children playing, women singing, men sharing stories. It was not a perfect country. It would never be a perfect country. But it was a country where an old farmer could stand on his own land without fear, where a young man with a pen could challenge the powerful, where a president remembered that he served the people, not the other way around. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Author's note: this story is inspired by real events in Burkina Faso, where President Ibrahim Traoré has taken dramatic stands against corruption. While the specific story of Moussa and his farm is fictional, it represents countless real cases of land theft and official corruption that plague many African nations. The story is dedicated to every person who has ever written a letter to power, stood up to injustice, or refused to accept that corruption is simply the way things are. Change is possible. Justice is achievable. It requires courage, sacrifice, and leaders who remember why they sought power in the first place. To every farmer who has lost land to corrupt officials, to every citizen who has been told they don't matter, to every young person who believes a better world is possible, your voice matters. Your truth matters. One letter, one act of courage, one person refusing to accept injustice. That is how nations change. May we all have the courage of Moussa, the determination of Ali, and the integrity of leaders who kneel in the dust with those they serve.